In this video, we're going to preview the logic of dilemmas. Hi, I'm the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com. I hope you're doing well. We're going to consider the litigiosus as one of the more famous types of dilemmas, but even more famous is the Euthyphro dilemma, which we will only sample here because much has been written on that. We will consider responding to dilemmas and constructing dilemmas. Responding to a dilemma would include, and I'll explain this in a moment or two, taking it by the horns, escaping between the horns, or rebutting the dilemma, or simply admitting that the dilemma works. Now, colloquially, a dilemma is a situation or argument with unsatisfactory or undesirable choices. There's a fork in the road, and one irreversible choice has to be made, yet both options are not good. Now, a dilemma will contain two premises. You're going to have a disjunctive proposition with an or. For example, the simple constructive dilemma has the proposition either A or B. There will also be a proposition that will be a conditional or contain multiple conditionals. So here we have the if-then. It's a conditional. So if A, then C. If B, then C. Now, the dilemma's formal structure is not what makes it especially interesting. What makes dilemmas interesting deals with the informal uses, or the so-called material uses, in real life, in debates, and in philosophical puzzles, like the Litigiosus. In such dilemmas, it's essential that you're going to get some undesirable conclusion, and the dilemma must be exhaustive. That is, it lists all of the alternatives. Now, if we consider the formal structure, say, of the simple constructive dilemma, there's nothing about it that makes the conclusion C undesirable, right? But when we're thinking about dilemmas in an informal logic, we're thinking about usually a conclusion that's undesirable. But presently, let's just take a look at the formal structure. And I'm going to write this into propositional logic. So here we have either A or B. That's the first premise. We're then told if A, then C, and if B, then C, and our conclusion is, therefore, C. That makes intuitive sense. A is a case or B is a case, but if A is a case, then C will be the case, or if B is the case, then C will be the case, so C must be the case. We have a modus ponens. If A, then C, A, therefore C, or if B, then C, B, therefore C. That sort of thing. The complex constructive dilemma is either A or B, but if A, then C, and if B, then D, conclusion, therefore, C or D. Again, that's pretty intuitive. A is the case or B is the case, but if A is the case, C will be the case, or if B is the case, D will be the case. So either C or D. Then we have the simple destructive dilemma. If A, then B and C, but either not B or not C, therefore not A. Again, that's pretty intuitive. Either B or C is not the case, so we're saying this consequent of that conditional is not the case, so we can deny that antecedent, so therefore not A. And then we have, finally, the complex destructive dilemma. If A, then C. If B, then D, but either not C or not D. Therefore, either not A or not B. So we know C or D is not the case, but then, given these two conditionals, if C is not the case, A can't be the case. Or if D is not the case, then B cannot be the case. So those are pretty straightforward. Consider this example from one of my favorite textbooks in all of logic, namely Principles of Logic by George Hayward Joyce. So he gives this example. If he were intelligent, he would see the worthlessness of his argument. If he were honest, he would owe himself wrong, but either he doesn't see his arguments are worthless, or seeing it, he will not own himself in the wrong. Conclusion, therefore, either he is wanting in intelligence or he is dishonest. Now, what kind of dilemma is that? Well, it actually matches the complex destructive dilemma. It's formally destructive because one of the consequences of either of its conditionals must be false. That is, either he doesn't see the worthlessness of his argument or he will not own himself wrong. It is formally complex because those consequences are different. And in propositional logic, we can put it this way. We have, let's say, I arrow W and H arrow O, not W or not O. Conclusion, therefore, not I or, not H. But I think we can just kind of take our, let's say, verbal reasoning and see that our verbal intelligence and see that this is intuitively a valid argument. But how could you respond to that argument? I gave that argument to you. How would you respond? Well, you might accept it and say, okay, you're right. Either I'm wanting, intelligent, or dishonest, or vice versa. Maybe you're giving that argument to me, and I'm saying, okay, yeah, it's true. I'm wanting an intelligence, or I'm just being dishonest here. But maybe we don't want to accept that argument. So how can we respond? And the way to do it here is by taking it by the horns. Alternatives in a dilemma are called horns. So if we're responding to a dilemma, one way to rebuke a dilemma is to say that at least one of the horns of the dilemma doesn't lead to the bad consequences. So the premise with a conditional or conditionals might be false. And if that's the case, then we're taking the argument by the horns. But on the other hand, sometimes we can escape between the horns. So again, alternatives in a dilemma are called horns. The question then must be if those horns are exhaustive. If there's another alternative not given, and this new alternative does not lead to some undesirable result, then we can escape between the horns. Another approach deals with rebutting the dilemma, and this is especially popular due to its rhetorical appeal. It's to offer a counter-dilemma that shows that the given alternatives lead to inclusion that is opposed by the person who offered the very first initial dilemma. So one famous example is as follows. We have an Athenian mother, and she tells this to her son, who's about to enter politics, to argue, don't enter politics. If your speech is just, then men will hate you. And if it is unjust, your speech, then the gods will hate you. So therefore you will just be hated. Well, the son offers a counter dilemma. He replies, if I say what is just, the gods will love me. And if I say what is unjust, men will love me. So I'm just going to be, I'm just going to be loved. So that's an alternative approach when it comes to dilemmas. Now, if we synthesize this, we should get an idea about how to construct a dilemma. So start at the end. Consider the conclusion as your starting point. That's what you want to prove or demonstrate. Then think of two alternatives that lead to that conclusion. And 3, create the dilemma with one of the above forms. Okay, that is to say, the complex destructive dilemma, the simple destructive dilemma, the complex constructive dilemma, or the simple constructive dilemma. So we have 2 alternatives, and we could put them into one of those forms to reach our undesirable conclusion. But what about those 2 famous examples? So the first is the Litigiosus, which I think is pretty cool. So we have Protagoras, who is a pre-Socratic rhetorician who agrees to instruct a poor student, Euthyphro. Now, by agreement, that student must pay the remaining half of the bill after he wins his first lawsuit. Now, some time passes, and he becomes involved in no lawsuits, and therefore he doesn't pay. So Protagoras sets up a dilemma. He wants his money. He tells the student he will take him to court. He gives him a dilemma. On the one hand, Protagoras argues, if the court rules in my favor, then you have to pay. However, if on the other hand the court doesn't rule in my favor, namely Protagoras' favor, then by the terms of our agreements, you still have to pay. Because, hey, you won your first lawsuit, so you better be paying me. So either way, if the court rules in my favor that you owe me that money, I win. If I lose the court case, hey, by the terms of our agreement, you got to pay me. But then Euthyphro responds with a counter dilemma. So he responds, on the contrary, if the court rules against me, then by the terms of our agreement, I don't have to pay, right? Because I didn't win it. On the other hand, if the court rules in my favor, again, I don't have to pay. So either way, I don't have to pay. We seem to be stuck here, right? So supposedly, as the story goes, the courts didn't come to a decision here. But actually, this is a solvable dilemma, interestingly enough. We can solve it as long as we reject both dilemmas. And answering the question must be based either on the agreement or on the court ruling exclusively. And that's unlike these dilemmas that are offered. So Protagoras actually can win this in the following way. He can stick to the terms of the agreement and then lose in court, since Euthyphro has yet to win a case. Then Protagoras can bring him back to court, and this time Protagoras will win since Euthyphro has won his first case. So that's a pretty cool and solvable dilemma. A much more famous dilemma, the Euthyphro dilemma. God commands us to do what is good. The question to ask, though, is what makes something good? And on reflection, it seems to be the case that either morality becomes arbitrarily based on God's will, which then could change what was once an evil to a good, or vice versa, or it makes the question of ethics of goodness totally independent of God and his sovereignty. So on the one hand, if we say something is good because God commands it, then morality becomes arbitrary, and something very bad today might become good tomorrow. That's a bad consequence. On the other hand, if God commands what is already good, we have another problem, because then morality becomes independent of God, and there's a standard higher than God that judges God. So we have these two horns. They lead to bad consequences. Now, is there a solution here? Well, actually, yes, because we can escape between the horn, or horns, I should say. And this is based on what is called divine simplicity. So rather than God having goodness, God just is goodness itself. It's not independent of God, nor is it based on God's arbitrary will. Basically, I would say the traditional view is that goodness and God's will are not distinct from each other, such that what is objectively good cannot be different from what God immutably wills. And in this sense, we escape between those horns. But again, there's definitely more to be said when it comes to that dilemma. Anyhow, I'm the Amateur Logician. I've been busy lately. That's why content production has slowed down. But I'm still very interested in the René Descartes philosophy series. I'm also in the slow process of creating a new logic course. Please note that my website, amateurlogician.com, goes into a bit more depth on dilemmas. Moreover, there are several other pages dedicated to teaching people logic. You can definitely start to master traditional logic with my website alone. Now, if you profit from my work, please consider giving this video a like. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel. And as always, feel free to leave a comment. I very much appreciate them and read them. Thanks for watching, and be well.